Hi, good afternoon, everybody. So as we start the hour today, I would just like to introduce Women Accelerators first and then our speaker. So we are a non-profit organization very passionate about promoting the advancement of women since 2011. And we have two chapters. One is in Cambridge, other is in Lowell. Massachusetts, and our mission is to provide a centralized network and community where career focused women can access resources such as mentoring, leadership programs, and events like these. Uh, Today, with us we have Shifra Birke. Welcome, a very warm welcome to you, Shifra. She's an executive and leadership coach who, for many years, has coached people diagnosed with ADD and ADHD. She's worked with business owners, professionals, and various families from various backgrounds. And she has about 30 plus years of experience in behavioral health and helping people with transitions. She's also an author of Together We Heal, as well as she's a producer of Shrink Rap. So this was a syndicated cable TV show that aired for more than 20 years. So a personality with various hats, and I think we would first want to start and hear from you that how did you end up your focusing your career on ADD and ADHD?
So it's a maybe typical and atypical answer to this question, but my older son was diagnosed at age 8, and that was 1985. So in 1985, we didn't know much about ADD or ADHD. The term was actually just getting started. We'd been using another term prior, hyperkinetic reaction of childhood, or some name like that. Anyway, the way I found out was a teacher, very inappropriately, third grade teacher said to me, you know, your son is writing this sloppy, lazy way, and you need to be much more firm with him at home. You're not doing, you know, what you need to be doing. And it didn't match up with how I understood my son. You know,
I can just go.
We've got
I would
somebody
request
else who
if,
wants to speak.
if you're all who've joined right now, if you can keep yourself on mute, we'll have a Q&A round, and you're also free. I'm sorry to barge in right now. Sorry, Shifra, but you all can post in your questions in chat. And Shifra, I see you've also gone on mute.
There you go. Everybody got muted, including me. I actually realized that I have, there's and now I'm spotlighted. I had the view of everyone, so I was looking to see and not noticing that I was muted, which tells you something right away about me, which we will get to. So I'm shifting my screen with, now I can see better. So this teacher basically said that my son was lazy, didn't match up what I understood about him. So fundamentally, I was lucky. I had a friend who'd been doing this work for a really long time before we even again had the diagnosis. And I went to her and said, you know, so Lanny, what do you think? She, at this point, had her PhD, was a neuropsychologist, and decided to test him. And when she tested him, it turned out that he had a pretty substantial learning disability and moderate ADHD. So from there, I became, you know, the mother bear, trying to really learn and protect and understand a whole lot about ADD and ADHD. So she both gave me a lot of hope because he was gifted super gifted alongside very learning disabled. So in the areas he was going to have trouble, he was going to have a lot of trouble. In the areas in which he could excel, he would major excel. And to put a piece in for you in terms of yourselves or children in terms of hope. The hope was very important. And it turns out that in college, he was the scholar athlete of the school. He was appointed to the board of directors as a college student. He's gone on to be a partner at PwC, and he's done beautifully. And if you were to meet him today, what you would see is a guy who was on the move, but you wouldn't see any of the kinds of things that were difficult to parent, lots of impulsivity and hyperactivity, what today we would call predominantly ADHD, predominantly impulsive hyperactive or hyperactive impulsive. So in addition to the hope, she also gave me all these warnings about how schools were going to perceive him. And again, all of those things prompted me to learn a lot. So I was doing that. And then I was a psychotherapist at the time. And what I discovered was some of my very favorite clients were the very energetic, doing this kind of thing through the meeting, bouncing around, creative, inventive, interesting language and metaphors, finding solutions to problems that were phenomenally interesting to me. So of course, you're getting the picture that I really enjoyed working with people with ADHD, and many of my colleagues did not. It just was not fun for them. So I started getting lots of referrals. So I think that might be enough answer to the question. Oh, maybe there's one more to say, that alongside, I was discovering all this ADHD in my own family, my siblings, my late husband. And at some point I got really curious about myself. And as I imagined, and you will get the chance to see as this hour goes on, I'm really right on the border. If you think about mild, moderate, and severe ADHD, which is what we think of, there is a full spectrum of different kinds, by the way, of ADDs in my mind, not just one, then I'm either just out or just in. So anyway, I think that's enough an answer. And if you have more questions or others have questions about that, I'm happy to say more.
Great. That's awesome. A good flashback into your own experiences. So you've experienced this on your own, and you have also have had fantastic patients. And now I'm not call them patients. I'll just call them clients, or people you've dealt with. So what are the greatest challenges and myths that we are facing right now with ADHD?
So let's start with myths, because I think maybe that comes before a challenge. So I think one of the biggest myths is about medication. People hear ADHD and they instantly think, oh, I need to get medication. And medication can be very helpful, and we'll have the chance to talk about that. Many people never go on medication. They get the diagnosis and they never go on medication. What they do is they learn what gaps there are or what challenges that there are, and then find compensations. So it's as or more important to do things like exercise. Exercise is hugely beneficial for all kinds of brain things, all the way from depression and anxiety to ADHD and many other things. Sleep, finding ways to get your sleep hygiene more under control can make a huge difference. Nutrition can make a big difference. And there are lots of conversations about yes sugar, no sugar, research that will support all kinds of things. I'm trying to think of all the mindfulness, huge, the mindfulness or meditation. So I think medication is is rife with that myth. I do want to say that for many people, medication is profoundly helpful. So don't hear what I'm saying at the beginning, that I'm in any way minimizing the benefits of medication. But there are many people, my son, for example, we didn't do medication. I didn't know enough back then. I'm knowing everything I know now. I might have done an experimental piece in high school with him, you know, talked with him about that possibility. Not sure. It's legitimate to wonder about that. Challenges. It's challenging. Well, Shruti, let me ask you, are you thinking when you ask that question, challenges to those of us who are in the adult professional work world, or are you thinking about parenting? You thinking about having a supervisor who has ADHD? What kinds of things are
I
you
think it'll be for a person who thinks who has ADHD and or who's been
okay.
diagnosed with ADHD. What are the challenges for them?
So that person recently diagnosed. I think the challenges probably came more from prior to the diagnosis than after the diagnosis. If anything, the diagnosis can be very comforting because there's an explanation for what's going on. I think one of the challenges is our own perception, though. Do we have a perception of ourselves as broken? There's something wrong with me. People are going to judge me. I'm judging myself. So I think there are those challenges. In terms of the actual way that we live, we've had to live the same way the day before we got the diagnosis or the day after we got the diagnosis. We're still, whatever, if barging into conversations is part of what our ADD is. We're going to still be, we were barging in yesterday and we're barging in tomorrow when we got the diagnosis today. If task completion is the problem, again, those things are going to be very similar. So if what we're asking is, if you have ADD or ADHD, what kinds of problems come up for you, then that may be a different question.
So I just want to welcome all the participants who've recently joined in, and you're free to type in your question in the chat if you have any as we go along. We'll take them in between or we'll take them at the end, but please feel free to post your questions. Yeah, Shifra, back to you. So uh, interesting insight on what you've said. So can ADHD develop in adulthood as well?
Can it develop in adulthood? The answer is no, according to all the experts. However, don't assume that we can't discover it in adulthood. It's often discovered in adulthood. What happens is enough things accrue that, we're not able to juggle. We might be a good 3-ball or 4-ball juggler, and then somebody throws in the 5th, and that might be, it might be kids. It might be kids during COVID. I think we have, we need some mutes. Yeah. There we go. Thanks. It could be menopause. It could be a stressor like taking care of a parent or an ill child, a divorce. So it could be a job promotion in which the tasks change dramatically. So we can feel like all of a sudden we've got ADD. The place it gets discovered a lot is either, if you have children, then you might have heard from school or from another parent or someone that your kid has ADHD, you go find out, and when you start researching a little, you're like, oh, that was me. I have a lot of those. I can check a lot of those boxes. So a lot of people discover that they have ADHD because one of their kids does. But no, you need to have had these whole series of things as a child in order to be medically considered.
So you did mention this questionnaire, the format in which you check boxes and there's some questions which you answer. So yeah, would you be able to share that with our participants post a call, and we can send it out as a with the mail? So just a quick, and how reliable is that? If I like, I myself was trying to answer those questions, I was like, oops, I probably have ADHD. So how, what's the next step? Let's say you're somebody listening to it, you answer those questions and you feel that, oh yes, I'm um in that bracket where I think that I have ADHD.
So
What's the next then? What's the diagnosis? What's the treatment like? And what's life ahead?
okay, so first I would say those checklists can be really helpful. And I just want to add that different ones of us are different self-reporters. So some people, if it says, you interrupt people, there are some of us who are raised to be so polite that if we interrupt just a little, we would say yes. I interrupt a lot. And then there are people who are raised to be, very communication involved. What, I don't know, I'm looking for words to describe people who are really comfortable, being in a different kind of banter. And those same people may interrupt more, but rate themselves less. So you might want to be attentive to that question. If you end up curious enough because the scores keep indicating that, yes, I may have ADHD, I would look for someone, not your family doctor, probably, unless you're looking for a referral from your family doctor, if they have someone who really super specializes in ADHD. And there are a lot of reasons for that. So the biggest thing, I think, the biggest challenge, back to challenge maybe, is finding a good treater. And that person could be a psychotherapist who then leads you, if medication seems important, leads you to someone that they trust and work with. It could be a coach, an ADHD coach, same thing. If medication is warranted, they'll be connected. The reason primarily to look hard for someone who's very experienced and who specializes is, for example, I don't mean to be maligning family doctors, especially now, but around ADHD, their knowledge base might be to have one or two medicines, and they're probably going to spend 20 minutes with you max. And what you really want is someone who's going to have 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 medicines, because they're going to want to know, is there co-occurring anxiety or depression? When you take medicines of this and that kind, do you get more lethargic or do they energize you? They're going to want a whole big family history and understanding of other aspects of your life. So anyway, you're going to look for someone really who comprehensively understands this.
Yeah, we have a question from Susu as well, that what are the telltale signs of ADD, ADHD? And
Okay, so Susu, there are different kinds of ADD. So there's an inattentive variety. And in that, it would be that for those of you who might have that, you might listen to a third of what I'm saying. And even if what I'm saying is compellingly interesting to you, you might listen to half to 3/4, but you're going to keep zipping out and Something will grab your attention. It might be something visual. I'm looking out this beautiful window to a hummingbird plant. I happen to be in Tucson. I'm like in, heavy luxury right now, in terms of climate and so on. So it might be visual distractibility. It might be something auditory. It might be something in your own mind. So inattentiveness can be a telltale signs. You realize that you're listening at work, but you're missing a lot, or at home. There's certainly hyperactivity. You notice that you need to stand more than other people. You need to exercise more than other people. That's the one that I can raise my hand on. I have a lot of physical energy. And so it may be things like you're sitting somewhere and your knees are rocking and your toes are tapping, or moving up and down, or you're fiddling with something in your hands. You've got busy hands. And then the other one is impulsivity, and that can look all the way from the interrupt conversation that we talked about. You don't really wait for the other person to finish. You jump in, all the way to decision making, where you might discover that you have taken on an extra task that really doesn't make sense given how busy you are, or more clients, or bought the car, or spent money, and have a kind of what we used to call fire ready aim. So do first, think second. So those would be some of the telltale things. Lots of things around what we would call executive function as well. How well can you prioritize the tasks and the demands in front of you? Can you keep what's important? Can you move things along, progressively, or do you find yourself overwhelmed? So there are more, but the checklist will come to you and you'll get the chance to see it, because I see that there are more questions.
Yeah, there are a couple of questions from Mary. So, Mary, would you want to go off mute and ask, or do you want me to read out?
I will, let me turn my video on. I'll leave my initial question till later, but just going off of the distractibility component, this is something that always really confuses me, because I'm very good at being tuned in and attentive on an interpersonal level, but when I'm alone, that's when I feel like I'm struggling with ADHD, or when I'm left to do my own things, like not with other people. So I was just curious, like, if this can present differently, and because so often we hear about it in a relational way,
That is such a great question, and thank you, because I didn't address that, and it's ultimately important.
Mm-hmm.
I would say two things about that, at least two things. One is that I wish I had remembered to say that I think ADD, like attention deficit disorder, or attention deficit, is like so the wrong term. Mm-hmm. Because there isn't necessarily a deficit in attention across the board. Even people who are wildly, at the extreme of distractibility can hyperfocus.
Right.
And we hyperfocus in different places. And for some of us, that's interpersonally.
Yeah.
So what you described makes so much sense to me. Now, some other people you may know hyper focus around certain tasks. We certainly see it with gaming. We can have very florid ADHD children and adults who can be on a game for 7 hours and not move.
Right.
So the alone piece may be around executive function.
Right.
And so, yeah, it makes sense. And that's where you may think about medication, but you also may think about what are the specifics, the specific areas I struggle with, and how do I compensate? So some of my clients in that same situation, here are the range of things I can think of. there's someone who hires someone called it's a person who does coaching, but she body doubles as well. And body doubling is I'm on the other end of the phone.
Yep. Yeah.
And I get you launched.
My brother has that.
Okay. And so
Yeah.
for many people, they can just do the first 15 minutes of a 2-hour task. The person is on, yeah. Do you want to describe it? Like what your brother has?
Yeah, my brother has a very similar diagnosis to what you described in your son. My mom sent him to Catholic school, and it was a horrible experience because they didn't understand. So he has the hybrid ADHD that encompasses both aspects of it, but he's very hyperactive and impulsive. And so when he was struggling with mental health and trying to get back into finishing his college degree, then my mom and him decided that was the best way to help him get reacclimated and figure out what are his gaps by working with somebody one-on-one until he could get on his own feet.
So that sounds like an interesting and variation of what I was thinking. So that's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for your answer.
Okay. Do you feel like if it was adequate, we can?
Yeah, I don't want to take
Okay.
the whole session. I just thought that was worth follow-up. Thank you.
Okay, good. Thanks.
We have another question from Laura. So Laura, if you want to ask it, your question or? Okay, so she has a question which says, what are your thoughts and insights about the generations raised with bombardment of social media and technology? Does this kind of environment of constant stimulation and constant accountability lead to the propensity of for developing ADHD?
So the experts would say that you're probably not going to be able to create biological ADHD because it's heritable. And unless we think that, and I don't know the answer to this part, unless we think that this new constant stimulation is changing our brain chemistry, and then later we'll have more ADHD. That piece I don't know. What I can say that's problematic is that too much screen time and too much quick stimulation is taking time away from developing the kind of mindfulness where we internally need to generate the ability to sustain attention. So if we're dependent on this external stimulation, we get bored really easily. That's problematic. Again, saying the same thing, we aren't bored enough to find things to do that are interesting to us, that are intrinsic to us. And so I think both as adults, we need to find ways to work a little harder at finding things that sustain attention. And as parents and, grandparents and aunts and uncles and all that, it would behoove the children if we found ways to not give in as often.
So at this point, I would want to go back to our earlier question, which we were talking is how is it different in women and men?
So before I even go to the women and men, I was saying to Shruti before the call that the way we framed that question is really pretty archaic, right? Because what we know is that we all have a range of testosterone and other hormones. And so being so binary about this is problematic in a whole lot of ways. And that matches up with how the field has been evolving. So we're evolving, hopefully, as humans and as caring and concerned people around diversity. And the field is evolving. So it used to be when I first started, 1985-ish, that girls were almost never diagnosed. And the only time girls were diagnosed were really expert psychotherapists and physicians and whatever who were aware of this daydreamy kind of ADD, what we now know is the inattentive variety. And as the years have gone on, what we've been finding is that there really is not very much difference between, you know, I don't even want among the genders and among people, that we just have labels for things. So we conjure up this, you know, feisty boy, and we give a different name to, you know, some, you know, another child. So the basic is that there really is not nearly so much difference. What we need to look at is personality. And for the child who's more retreated, they may very well have ADD of the inattentive variety, and we need to tease that out. We're going to notice the, you know, interrupty, jumping around kid, but maybe not give much attention to the child who's not making trouble, but maybe not thriving either.
Yes, that's true. So another great question from the chat. So is there a role career type that is best suited for people with ADHD? There's a question from Stephanie, and a couple of others also want to know this.
So again, it depends on your particular brand of ADHD. So let's use my son. My son has a good sprinkle of compulsivity. So doing all this, originally he was doing this accounting and tax advice stuff. And he could do it. He could sustain that attention because he had this other sprinkle. So in addition to the hyperactivity, he had a way that his brain helped him harness energy. Like he's the guy who had the neat room. You wouldn't necessarily, you know, put that together. Careers, I'm wanting to sit back and figure out how to answer this well, because I'm a little distracted by thinking about the professions of the people that I worked with. So let me name those, but they're not necessarily the ones that are in this room. So as a psychotherapist, I did not do traditional psychotherapy. I was more coachy, and 50% of my caseload were state troopers. State trooper, police, very good profession for ADD, because you can be in the moment, hyper focused at the time you need to be, and things keep moving, so you're not bored. So looking for, translate that to maybe some other professions. So operating rooms, ERs, people do a lot of that kind of work. The kinds of jobs that we might think about, I don't really know who's in this room, but entrepreneurs are really good if they have the matched compensatory person who is the opposite, who loves to get things done, who slows things down, who thinks things out, who drives the CEO or the entrepreneur crazy because they keep throwing the brakes on. But without the brakes, that CEO, that creative, vision maker may go off the edge. So CEO can be a great kind of position, or, business startup, but don't forget to get the person who is going to be, compensating for the things that you're not good at. Other kinds of work, if you have inattentive kind of ADD, you really want something that is really interesting to you, right? So you're really needing to look for where you can hyper focus because you like it so much. It's maybe why artists become artists in some cases, because it's so compelling and drives their meaning and their autonomy and their creativity. It just fits a lot of, checks a lot of boxes. I don't know if I'm answering enough, if that's enough, or if you can, like, if you can extrapolate from that, or if you wish I would say more.
One
Yeah,
thing to just add, oh, sorry.
sorry, go ahead.
I was just thinking, because I recently left a job, and I think a really helpful way to think about it is like, do you want to be somebody that's doing the work, or do you want to be somebody that's supporting and overseeing people? Because like what you were saying about like, what are your particular symptoms and struggles? You know, like I'm somebody who's much better at being assigned the things I have to do, because then it gives me structure and it's really sturdy, but you know, that's not right for everybody. So sometimes I feel like zooming out a little bit about like overall traits can be helpful too, because I know that finding a job that's a good fit is so overwhelming.
Well, good for you, huh? For understanding enough about yourself, which I think is key here. So we didn't talk about what kinds of things are important, but figuring out who you are, what really works, moving pride aside, because for some people, they have this impression of who they should be versus like who they would be happier being. So yeah, I think that sometimes having things assigned and having a deadline and having expectations really is a kind of scaffolding for a brain that, you know, really needs that support system. And for some people that feels so constraining that they need to do something different, but have someone else provide that, which is what sometimes coaching does for people. Like with some of my clients, the function I serve really is to be what you just described that you are for, you know, in yourself. And that's, okay, I'm seeing more
So,
questions, so I'm going to be quiet.
yeah, so since we are on the career, I would want to ask another question related to that is, should I, if I have ADHD and I know it, I've been diagnosed with it, so should I tell my employer that I have ADHD, or, and if I have to, then how should I tell them?
So I'd be really, 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 I could say 20 reallys careful as I was considering that question. And if my job were not in jeopardy and I were doing a good job, I would ask why disclose. If I were conversely about to get fired, and I thought that I could do this job with some accommodations, then I would potentially and probably disclose because I wouldn't want to be fired. In between those two, I would want to know that there's potentially the chance to be judged and discriminated against, the kinds of work that might be given to me. And if I were into part two of what you were asking, Shruti, if I were to say something, I would approach this from a strength-based conversation. So a simple example, I would say, I work best when it's as quiet as possible. So I'm going to use the conference room when it's not being used so that I can do the very best work for you that I can, versus, you know, I've got ADHD, it's important that you know it, and my auditory distractibility is going to be really high unless I can get it quiet. You can hear the difference both in language, but also in what that might communicate to someone. So I would be thinking about how to do whatever we're going to call kind of a strength-based conversation.
And it's similar on the similar lines. There's another question from Allison, which says that what would be your advice to the parents who have young children who are diagnosed with ADHD? Should they share this with their children now or later when they are older? The worry is that, you know, if a child comes to know, then they would not feel confident, or that they are different from other children.
So I think a lot depends on the child and the environment that the child is in. I would be among the library books or books that I was having my child read, depending upon the age, I would have them reading. I'd go to the librarian, the children's librarian, and say, okay, give me your best books on, whatever the age is. And because there were some fun books, there are some interesting books, there are some informative books, and parents hopefully are on the journey of learning what's going to be useful for their child. I'd be asking questions of that child when we're reading the book, so, wow, Jumping Johnny is really having trouble sitting still. Like, what do you think? What do you think about that? Do you have trouble sitting still, or are you like a sit still person? So I would begin to try to neutralize out the diagnosis. There are some children who will feel better because they may be getting labeled at school as lazy or uncooperative or whatever some terms are. Teachers and other students may be either saying things to them or interacting in such a way that you could start to feel your child's sense of self or self-esteem not being where you want it. And so sometimes having an explanation, if you can be neutral, pay attention to how you're going to communicate this. If you were communicating diabetes, you wouldn't be judgmental with your child. You'd be appropriately concerned, as well as, figuring out, okay, so here's the way we need to do your food. And I would hope it would be equivalent.
So how to be, as a topic of the discussion says, that gifts and downsides. So we, of course, we all know about the downsides, which we've been talking, but what are the gifts of ADHD, and how do we spin this whole thing into the positive note on which it actually is? And we've seen so many, successful people with ADHD. So
yeah, literally, after this call, you might Google like geniuses with ADHD. So, Da Vinci and Einstein. Einstein couldn't read. He was so learning disabled, they like threw him away at school. If you look at, some of the posters and some of the things said about him. So I would be looking at where the potentials are. Where are those, islands or whole countries of competence within that person? So creativity is high. Oftentimes interpersonal, the person who mentioned being very attentive. Very often people with ADD are superb communicators, very tuned in to other people. That's where they might hyper-focus. Very out of the box, the kinds of creative thinking that people do. So many of my clients start companies and startups, and for things that we couldn't even dream was not only possible for building a company, but like the notion, I'm not free to say, I'm wanting to tell you one, but like something that, like one of my clients is doing something that environmentally, literally may change the whole way we deal with waste. Most of us just don't have that capacity. When I get ready to do any training of any kind, I get really obsessional and I start Googling like I'd never heard the term ADHD. And that's what happened with this one. I'm reading all this stuff, whatever. And I came upon a term that now I have to look at. Yes. So it was cognitive dynamism. I've never seen that term before, but it was this description of like why I like working so much with people with ADHD. There's so much dynamism in the way that their brains work. Am I answering enough of your question, Shruti?
yes, you are.
Okay.
Yeah. Any other questions from the participants? Please feel free to unmute or type in the chat. And so, is a person ever too old for medication?
I think the answer is no. There are people who in their 80s have decided to try medicine and been quite successful. Can we stay on medicine for a second? Something good to know, if you don't already, about many of the ADD meds are that they're short acting. So you get feedback much more quickly than you do with most of the other medications for any other mental health, or behavioral health issue. So the psychotropic medications, generally you need, to wait X period of time, and you need to bounce up double the dose after a certain period. With the many of the ADD meds, you don't have to do that. So, in pretty short order, whether they're benefiting you or not, which is very nice. Now, I would say the reason to go to an expert is that, again, that expert is going to know what kind of medicine you might consider trying. If X medicine doesn't work, they may have Y, Z, and A, B, C, D. And they know from the way it didn't work for you, it made you feel agitated, you had trouble sleeping, it made your brain buzzy, whatever the pieces were. And they may be able to easily say to you, well, it would be with this particular reaction, you might want to stay with it 2 more days and see if that recedes, because we see that a lot. Or, you're in the wrong class of medications for you. I'm going to move you into this other class of medications.
So, who's this person who's who's the most qualified person to treat ADHD?
If you are talking about treat with medicine, is that what you mean by treat, or do you mean?
For both, for coaching. So, coaching, I understand you are amazing. But yeah, for behavioral health, or who's this professional who one should go to?
Amazingly, the degree does not, in my experience, the degree doesn't matter. It's really how long the person's been doing this work, what percentage of their caseload is ADHD, what have they studied, how much have they read, how much of the work, that have they done, if they have it, how much work have they done on themselves versus not. So I can't, I would say all the way from a master's level clinician, all the way up to a psychiatrist, psychotherapist, MD, but the big thing is going to be how much work have they done. So I know social workers that were the people I referred most to for non-medicine. There are psychiatrists who fundamentally, I was going to say who solely specialize, but almost none solely specialize, because there's so much what we in the field is called comorbidity. There are so many other things that coexist, couldn't find the word, coexist with ADHD. So it's not unusual to have anxiety or depression, or even, you might have bipolar disorder, mild, bipolar 1 or 2, other kinds of brain related issues. So the psychiatrist is the one in that situation who's, if medicine's involved, is going to need to know that. So.
Okay. So, Shifra, we're just about 10 minutes away from the end, and at this point, I want to ask you if have we covered all, is there something that you would want to discuss which we've not covered so far in the discussion?
I don't think so. I appreciate you asking that question. I realize that there's one thing I'd like to say about finding a clinician. There's a group called CHADD, CHADD. It's children, I believe it stands for Children with Attention Deficit Disorder, but they often have really good resources. So you might think about looking there. I would definitely check with family doctor or teachers at schools if you're talking about that. You know, if it's a child, who are they finding who's really helpful? I would get online with Psychology Today was just a magazine, and now many of you may know this or not. If you're looking for a clinician of any kind and you put in therapist, Chelmsford, Mass, ADHD, it's going to send you to the Psychology Today website, which has profiles of all the therapists who are signed up there. And so sometimes that's a really good place to start. And you get a sense of, you see the picture in a little blurb about who they are. And most will do like a 15-minute or 20-minute phone consult before an appointment. So that may be a way to begin.
Great. So for women, does it change? Let's say once you have children, or once like after during your menopause, does this change? I'm just assuming that yes, it does, but I'm not too sure. Like no.
Yeah, and I don't know the biology of actually it's something I actually don't know, but what I do know is that it is that juggling piece. For any of you who are working pre-COVID and post-COVID, you know that the variables and the stressors coming into your system are tremendously greater. And so menopause or having children or any big transition, whether that's an internal physical transition or an external one, is going to introduce a lot more variables, and it makes it harder to manage. So if you have ADHD and you've been able to keep it together, and you maybe didn't even know you had ADHD until kids, and maybe it was kids, or maybe it was kids plus COVID, when suddenly it just feels like all these balls are dropping and you're not able to keep up, and you feel so overwhelmed. The laundry, the cooking, the work, keeping priorities all straightened out. It's just much more demanding. So if you have the resources, and often that would be the financial resources, but it might be people resources as well, I would really be urging you to get more support. Just get more support during those times. And whether that's meals or house cleaning or, having somebody I have a client who started hiring someone for 15 minutes in the morning, every morning. Some do half hour, just to say, okay, here's what I'm doing today. And remind me tomorrow, if I haven't done these things, check with me. So, and that again, that could be a coworker who you're partnering with, and it could be somebody you hire for this kind of thing.
Great. So brings me to one last question which I had was, how likely is it that my children would have ADHD if I have it?
So it's more likely. It's no guarantee. So it's not a 1-for-1, but you up your odds. And I honestly don't know the correct statistic, because when I look this question up, I get different answers. 40% comes up, but so do other numbers as well. So if you know you have ADHD and you start to see behaviors in your children that either are around the, more energy than some of the children around them, or more daydreamy distractibility, or more impulsivity, and impulsivity can look a lot of different ways. So it can look like you bump into your kid and they punch you. And that's, that was one that we had. If you saw my son today, again, you'd never know this, but step on his toe by accident, he'd punch you. And just, you know, that like strong sensory reaction and needing to discharge it. So yeah, I would say if you notice this, then finding ways to appreciate the gifts really helps mitigate some of the stressors. And I would say doing your own, if you have children who have ADHD, and you can get yourself to do some mindfulness things. I guess this is an answer to your question. What would I say? I would encourage you to do that, because you may need to have a lot of do-overs, you know, that deep breath that says, okay, let's try this again. We're going to just try this all over again, so that the child gets the chance to do it right, rather than just be punished for having done it wrong.
Perfect. Thanks a lot, Shifra, for the great information and the insights that you've given. A couple of things are going to follow. Of course, we'll send you a recording of this event to all the participants. And we'll also share the checklist which Shifra mentioned, and that'll be a good checklist for all of you to see and evaluate ourselves. Though I'm sure that Shifra can help us. If I see somebody has also shared your LinkedIn onto the chat, so you'll probably have many people reaching out to you for help.
So it's very sweet, and I will do my best to be responsive. I have to say that I am semi-working, and which I don't say semi-retired because I don't know if I'll ever retire, but I am at 71. I've decided that I can back it up and do a lot more work pro bono than for money. So I will do my best to be paying attention to my LinkedIn, which I'm not as good about it as when I was looking for a lot of work.
Great, thank you so much. Anything else, Susu or Steph, do you want to add?
Thank you so much for everybody's time, and thank you, Shifra, for your amazing insight. This is such a hot topic, so we really appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, I really appreciate the opportunity. So thank you all for great questions, and good luck as you move forward on this path. It can be pretty cool.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's true. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.